What's good, everyone? Weeby is back with another video. In this video, I'll be trying something a little different. I'll be going through different series of, different series in general. For this specific one, I'll be going through High School DxD and deciding what type of Pokemon team they would have that best fits them. In terms of certain ones, namely gonna do like major villains or like the MCs, but without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, for this first one, we're going to go with Ise Hiyoto. So Ise Hiyoto is considered the main MC of High School DxD. So I figure it's only fitting that we start off with him. So his powers come from the legendary heavenly dragon known as Drag. It's called the boosted gear. It boosts his power every 10 seconds unless he has enough power to balance break, which he has been shown to do since he awakened the balance breaker, which boosts his overall power, overall destructive power. Also, being the wielder of a sacred gear allows him to have his feelings coincide with his power, with his sacred gear. So the stronger his feelings, the stronger his power will become. So the team I decided to go with is an entirely legendary dragon team. So started off, we've got Rayquaza. Rayquaza I threw on here mostly because he is considered one of the strongest dragon Pokemon. He's literally a living legend. Also, he's a flying type, which coincides with the fact that devils and dragons can fly in this and whatnot. So I went with him because he's literally a living legend. Also, he's like one of my favorite legendary dragon types, so kind of works out. And then I went with Reshiram. So Reshiram I went with because Ise's been shown to utilize the Dragon's Fire, and Reshiram is a Dragon Fire type. And not only that, Reshiram is white, and at one point, Ise gains the power of his rival, which is called Volley Lucifer. So Volley's power is called Divine Dividing. He has the other heavenly dragon within him, which is called Albion. Albion is his name, which allows him to divide the power of whatever he's touching in half every 10 seconds and add it to his own power. So at one point he gets this power, which works out because Reshiram is white and so is Albion. Albion is a pure white and blue dragon. Well, his scales are white, but his eye color is like bluish, which coincides with Reshiram. So that's why I went with Reshiram. And then I went with Eternitus for a couple reasons. So Eternitus literally caused a catastrophe in ancient times and almost caused it again in current times. And it coincides with the catastrophe that the Heavenly Dragons, Albion and Drake, caused with their fight. They decided to throw a fit and start fighting, disrupting the entire world, where the angels, the devils, and the fallen angels had to work together to seal them away, which works with Eternitus having single-handedly caused the catastrophe in ancient times. And then Zacian and Zamazenta, as well as their trainers, had to seal him away, essentially. Also, I went with him because he is a poison type, which coincides with the personality of Ise, which is just a tremendous pervert. Like, you think Master Roshi or Dry is bad? Ise is much worse, as Ise ends up absolutely making several techniques that involve his perversion. So that's why I went with him. And then I went with Dialga. So with Dialga, I went with Dialga personally because he gets... so Ise has what's called the Dragon's Armor, which is his balance breaker. Which I know armor typically is like a metal-esque type thing. So that's why I went with Dialga, is because he's steel, and whatnot. But moving on, I went with Kyurem, only because Kyurem is freaking dope. I like Kyurem. And that's literally the only reason. But moving on, I went with Palkia because water is probably one of the more used magical elements. A lot of people utilize the water element. So that's literally why I went with that. No other reason. Actually, I just thought of another reason. So when he awakens the ability to swap forms on the fly, because so the devil's servants are based off of chess pieces, and Ise is actually a pawn, meaning if he gets far enough into enemy territory, he can, change his form to knight, bishop, rook, or queen, and gain powers based on that. Rook has superhuman strength and defense. Bishop has unrivaled magical power, and knight has incredible speed. And then you have the queen, which is a perfect combo of all three of the other pieces. But Ise, on the other hand, can swap between these. And when he first swaps between them and utilizes his blasters for his bishop, he actually alters the dimension. And Palkia is the space Pokemon. So that's why I went with him. Alright, now let's move on to the next one. Alright, for this next one, I decided to go with Issei's master, Rias Gremory. She is the next head of the Gremory family, which is one of the 72 pillars of the Devil World, meaning she is basically a princess. So, without further ado, let's get into her team. So for her team, I decided to go with Pokemon that are based off of kings, knights, what have you. So to start it off, we have Zamazenta, which is quite literally a shield Pokemon. Especially if you have the Rusted Shield equipped to it, then it transforms in battle. And that's literally why I went with it. It's the shield Pokemon of one of the previous rulers of Galar, making it literally a shield Pokemon for a king. And moving on, we have obviously the other Pokemon from Galar royalty, Zacian. Zacian was one of the two Pokemon, Zamazenta included, that fought alongside the previous monarch of Galar. Previous monarchs, I should say, plural, because there were two rulers, to bring peace during the darkest day and defeat Eternitus. Equipping the rusted sword allows it to transform in the middle of battle, well, during battle, making it a very effective sword type attacking Pokemon, whereas Zamazenta is a defensive Pokemon. And then moving on, we have Aegis Slash, which literally has a move called King's Shield, which is basically protect with a different name. And also changes form, depending on what move you use. So if you use King's Shield, it'll stay in this form for defense. But if you use any attacking move, it'll change to its Sword and Shield form. So, literally, that one's pretty self-explanatory. So I went with Bisharp because it's basically a sharp bishop. Like, do I even need to explain this one? Do I? Alright, moving on, we have Calyrex. So, as you can see, I have two Calyrexes on here. So, there is a reason behind having regular Calyrex and Shadow Rider Calyrex. So, with normal Calyrex, so in the anime, what's his name? Azazel mentions that a good king is both knows how to lead and knows how to fight, and knows when to do either or. So that is why I have these two different Calyrexes. So with regular Calyrex, obviously regular Calyrex doesn't have very much in the terms of base stats compared to Shadow Rider Calyrex. But that being said, obviously this one is a complete powerhouse compared to regular Calyrex. So we have this Calyrex, which is my leader Calyrex, quote unquote. And then we have my fighting Calyrex, which is Shadow Rider. So that's why I went with that. And literally I went with Shadow Rider only because Spectrier is literally the one I started off with. And no other reason. But that being said, I think that's about it for this team. So let's move on to the next one. And for the fourth one, we're talking about Kiba, you know, the main swordsman of the entire series. The typage I went with his team is Dark and Steel because he uses swords, so that's the steel aspect, but he's a devil, so therefore we have Dark. But without further ado, let's get into it. Obviously, we have Bisharp again, because he is a Steel Dark type. And really, that's about the only reason Bisharp's on this team. And then we have Aegis Slash. Aegis Slash is because he's a sword-like Pokemon. And pretty much no other reason. But then he also has the move King Shield, which protects the king, quote unquote, which he does quite frequently as he protects Rias. And then moving on, we have Umbreon. So Umbreon could be based off of a dog or a cat. And I am going off the assumption that it is a dog. So the whole loyal dog thing is the whole reason I have Umbreon on here. No other reason. And then Escavalier, mostly because Escavalier's arms look like lances. It's a steel bug type, but his arms look like lances, so I put him on here because they look like weapons. And then Absol, couple reasons. One, it's another animal, so you know the whole loyal pet type thing. But the main reason is because Absol typically comes to people who are about to be in danger or what have you. And he had a tremendous tragedy happen in his past where all of his friends were just brutally murdered. Which is his motivation for fighting. So that's the whole reason Absol's on here. Because he shows up in tragedy or before tragedy. And there was the tragedy that happened for Kiba. And then moving on to Koboleon, mostly because Koboleon is a member of the Swords of Justice, and he's the only one that is Steel type. He learns Sacred Sword, Swords Dance. He learns a lot of sword-ish things. But yeah, that's about it for this team. Not a whole lot to explain with him, as they were pretty self-explanatory, other than like Umbreon and Absol. But yeah, moving on to the next team. Alright, for team number 3 of like 10 for this, we've actually got Akino. So for Akino, I decided to go with a Electric Dark team. Electric because that is typically her main source of attacking, and Dark because she is both. Well, mostly because she's a devil, but she is also a fallen angel, which has black wings. So it's mostly because of her heritage, as well as her main source of power. So for this, to start it off, we've got Arctozolt, which is a electric ice type. So this one's on here because she at one point does utilize Ice Magic when she's trying to train Ise and Agia. She doesn't use it to attack. She only uses it as a demonstration, but I decided to throw it in there because why the fuck not? And then moving on to the next one, we've got Emolga. Emolga is an electric flying. This one's on here because she is both a devil and a fallen angel. Both have the capability to fly, and that's literally it. And Emolga is like the only non-legendary electric flying type. So yeah, that's a thing. Then moving on, we've got Lantern. In the same demonstration I was talking about with the whole ice thing, she utilizes water as well. And obviously she's an electric type. In fact, Lantern's an electric type. In fact, Sharpedo is on here for the same thing. Because she utilizes water magic at some point as well. So her main source is electric, but she has utilized water. She's a fallen angel devil, but has utilized water. You get it. Weevil's actually on here for the same reason as Arctozolt, because of the whole ice thing. It's pretty self-explanatory. And Morpeko is on here because Morpeko is a electric dark type, making it the ultimate Pokemon for her team, because it utilizes her main source of power, which is electric, as well as her heritage, being a devil, fallen angel. But that's about it for her team. Not a whole lot to explain with her team. Yeah, moving on. Alright, for this next one, we're going off of Kaneko. For Kaneko, she's a Nekomata devil. So, for her team, I tried staying in the whole fairy slash dark realm for typage, because I figure fairies are similar to spirits, Nekomatas are spirits, so therefore we'll go with fairy type. And then she's a devil, so dark type. But my main concern was the Nekomata heritage of cat-like. But I ended up making a full team of pretty much dark type that are cat-like. The only one who is not a dark type is Sylveon. But yeah, so starting it off, we've got Absol, just like Kiba's team. So with Absol, she actually also went through a tragedy, where she basically got orphaned as a young female, as a young girl, and then a devil nobleman found her, and her sister murdered her master and ran away, and thus Kaneko had no one. But then Rias was given custody of her, and yeah, blah 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 blah. So that's the whole reason Absol's on here, other than the fact that Absol looks kind of like a cat thingy. And then Umbreon, as I've said, the evolutions could be foxes, they could be dogs, they could be cats. Who the fuck knows? But on that note, for the sake of this, Umbreon is a black cat, because I fucking said so. But so Umbreon obviously is cat-like. not gonna lie, that's literally the extent of what I thought about that one. Other than the fact that it's a dark type as well. Cat-like and dark type. So yeah, that's about it. Moving on to Sylveon. Sylveon is a cat-like. Could be based off of a rabbit too. You never know. Maybe a cat bit. A rabbit cat. Cabot. Whatever you want to call it. And also, it's the only one that is cat-ish that is a fairy type. So there's that. And then obviously we have Persian, a lowland Persian. Falls under the same thing, where it's just a dark type that's a cat. Liepard, same thing. Though this one's the only female, and Kaneko's a female, so I mean, there's that. We're all on the up and up. Woo. And then Incineroar, about the same thing. Yeah. Though this one's probably the most powerhouse of them. Which coincides with the fact that Kaneko is a rook, which is a powerhouse. Yeah, that's about it for this team. Not a whole lot of explaining. Pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, moving on to the next one. Alright, so for this next one, this is team number 8, for those who are wondering. So I went with everyone's favorite Valkyrie. The emotional wreck that serves under Lord Odin, Rayquaza. So for Rayquaza, I went with a Fighting Steel team. I think this is the last time I'm going to use Steel. But I went with a Fighting Steel team. So, starting it off, we've got Lucario. Obviously, Rayquaza utilizes magic, swords, hand-to-hand combat. So that's kind of why I went with Fighting Steel, and Lucario embodies that. He's got psychic moves, he's got energy blasts, but then he can also make weapons out of basically thin air with Bone Rush, Metal Claw. If you've seen the anime, makes like 3 claws come out of his, yeah. So that's why I went with that. Bisharp, kind of the same concept I've always been going with. It's based off of a Bishop-like Pokemon, which is perfect for teams based off of, you know, kings and knights and stuff like that. And then I went with Gallade for the psychic aspect, because she has an extensive magic library. Most of it is Norse magic, though, as she is a Valkyrie from the Norse mythology. But it does make sense if you think about it. And then I went with Excadrill, mostly because Excadrill's hands kind of look like swords. And that's it. It's the extent of that. And then I went with Surfetched, because it's got a lance and a shield. And that's the extent of that one. And then I went with Koboleon again, because Koboleon is a steel fighting type. One of the members of Swords of Justice, obviously. Learning variety of moves such as sword dance, sacred sword, stuff like that, making it perfect to make teams that utilize swords. But yeah, that's about it for this team. So let's move on to the next one. Alright, for the 9th and second to last team, I'm utilizing who I like to call the absolutely most powerful but also useless person in all of Rias's team, and that would be Jasper Vladi. Jasper Vladi is originally a human vampire who becomes a vampire devil through Rias Gremory. His dad is an unnamed, I believe. I believe it's unnamed, an unnamed noble vampire. Thus, he was treated like a freak by his fellow vampires, and as a monster by his fellow humans. So, yeah, there's that. But moving on, the team I decided to go with for him was Dark and Ghost. Dark is a reference to his devil heritage, and then Ghost is a reference to his vampire heritage. So, obviously, I decided to go with the two dark ghost type that they have, which is Sableye and Spiritomb. And that's about the only reference to this that there was, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. And then I went with Gengar for a couple reasons. He's a ghost, obviously, but he's also a poison type, which is also, I believe, is a reference to his vampire heritage, as a lot of the time vampirism is considered a infection or a poison to the human body. So yeah, I went with that one, and that's the same reason I went with Drapion as well. Is for that same reason. I went with Pangoro for a couple reasons. One, while Jasper may not be the strongest, he does have a secret power that makes him incredibly powerful, which is Balor View, which essentially is considered the eyes that stop time. So I went with Pangoro, someone who isn't exactly the strongest dark type or fighting type, but can still get the job done. Also, his evolution kind of reminds me of Jasper a little bit, where he starts off as something else, and then he becomes what he is currently, which is a reference to Dark. So, and then I went with Dragapult, mostly because Jasper himself is kind of like a pseudo-legendary, where he's regarded as one of the most powerful people in existence, but not many people know about him, nor is he very useful. Also, the dragon typage of Dragapult is a reference to the fact that Jasper was trained by Ise, which has the legendary dragon. So yeah, there's that. And I think that's about it for this team. I have one more team to go over. So that's about it for this one. For the next team I'm going to go over, we've actually got another steel type team, because they are, this particular one, trying to think how I want to word this. It's for Zenobia. Zenobia is the other knight under Rias's peerage. So for this one, Steel Fairy type. I chose Fairy instead, because I was thinking that Fairy would be the obvious natural enemy of Dark. So I went with Fairy for the holy aspect. So that's the whole reason. So we've got, to start off, we've got Mawile, which is one of the few steel fairy types. And that's really the only reason, other than the fact that it looks exactly like a female. Which I think it can only be female, but yeah. And then Klefki is another one that is a steel fairy type, and that's absolutely the only reason I went with Klefki. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone with Klefki. And then we have Rapidash. So being a knight, I chose Rapidash because Rapidash is a unicorn horse thing. So I think knight, horse, why not? And that was the extent of my thought behind that. And then I went with Hatternay because it's a fairy type, but it's also a female. One of the humanoid females that are fairy type. I could have gone with Gardevoir, but I decided to go with Hatternay instead. And then I went with Corviknight. Corviknight was because literally it says it in the name is knight. So Corviknight, yeah, went with Corviknight because of that. Also, she is a devil, so she could fly. So we also have a flying type. And then I went with Lucario because he's a steel fighting type, and she is constantly fighting, whether it be hand-to-hand, with a sword, what have you. She, in essence, is also a fighting guru. Very skilled. But that's about it for this team. So I'm going to move on to the next one. For the next one, I decided to go with everyone's favorite nun-turned-devil, Agia. So Agia Argento is a nun that Ise meets early on that ends up dying by some fallen angels. And Ise convinces Rias to resurrect her by making her into a devil. And that is how she becomes one of the MCs and main members of Ise's harem. For her team, I decided to go with a normal fairy type team. As you can see, a lot of them have a lot of extensive healing abilities, or are more of a cutesy type of Pokemon. And that is there's a couple reasons for that. So her sacred gear, it's called Twilight Healing, so she can heal herself or others. Thus, I went with this team. But she also is a very big fan of stuffed animals. Thus, I went with some of the more cutesy-esque Pokemon, such as Wigglytuff and Audino. So, without further ado, let's talk about them. So, Wigglytuff is very cutesy, and obviously can learn some healing abilities, being a normal fairy type. In fact, I think this is the only normal fairy type that's on here, is Wigglytuff. Everyone else is either a fairy or a normal. Which obviously gives her access to stuff like Moonlight, Draining Kiss, stuff like that. Moving on, we have Blissey. Blissey and Chansey have been considered like the healing Pokemon for decades now. You've got Soft Boiled, Healing Wish, tons of just healing abilities, which obviously makes it a very good support character, support Pokemon, which is the main focus of this entire team. But moving on, we've got Gardevoir. Gardevoir isn't as adept at healing as some of the other ones on this list, but being a psychic fairy type gives her access to Draining Kiss. I believe she can also learn Healing Wave, the same one that Blissey has. Healing Wish, stuff like that. And it is the most human-like, which is another reason I went with Gardevoir, because obviously Asia is a humanoid person. Moving on, we've got Clefable. So, this one, there's a couple reasons. Clefable is a former normal type that became fairy once they introduced fairy. Also, being fairy, it gains access to Draining Kiss, and a couple other healing moves. And as well as it's considered one of the cutesier-esque Pokemon. A lot of female trainers utilize Clefable if they aren't quote-unquote type-oriented. So that's the whole reason I went with Clefable. And then obviously there's Miltank. Miltank is a purely female type Pokemon. Thus, I went with Miltank, but also learns it has a signature move of its own, which is a healing move. Which I believe it's called like Moo something or another. Fuck. Why can I not think of it? We'll come back to that. And then I went with Audino because Audino looks very cutesy. Looks very stuffed animal-esque. Oh, that's what it was. Milk Drink. Milk Drink is the move I was thinking about for Miltank. Moving on though. So I went with Audino because Audino is obviously very stuffed animal-esque. Looks like a weird-ass stuffed animal from some obscure anime. And I believe Audino also learns like Healing Wish and some of the other moves that some of these ones can. So that's why I went with this team. It's fantastic. I should point out that if you plan on using some of these healing moves, oh, I don't think you can anymore. You used to be able to use them outside of battle, like soft boiled and milk drink, but I don't think you can anymore, which is a shame. But on that note, I think that's about it for this team. This team was very easy to make, actually. I'm not gonna lie. There are a lot of cutesy Pokemon that have a lot of healing abilities, so it was fairly easy to make this team. But we're gonna move on to the next one. Alright, everyone, so now it's time for the 10th and final team I'll be going over. This one's a bit different from everyone else because she's not a devil. She is the only association she has with devils is she's friends with them. But it is Irena. I forget her last name. But she is an angel, former human. And I decided to go with a psychic fairy team, which I almost could have just made it psychic and fairy all across the board. If I would have used Mime Jr. or so if I would have used Mr. Mime, Kanto one, and then Mime Jr. or either Ralts or Gardevoir's middle evolution, then I could have done an entire team of psychic fairies. But I didn't do that because I hate duplicates. I hate duplicating Pokemon on my team. That being said, I decided to go with Hatterene, which along with Gardevoir are the only humanoid psychic fairies other than Mr. Mime, but these are the only humanoid psychic fairies that are female looking. So that's why I went with those. Rapidash, because it looks majestic. Also, obviously, it's a psychic fairy. And then I went with Togekiss because it can fly, and she's an angel, so obviously she can fly. Gothitelle, it was because it's a humanoid female psychic type. So, obviously, why the fuck not? And then Tapu Lele. I went with Tapu Lele because out of it was either basically Tapu Lele or where was I going with that? Tapu Lele was the only female psychic fairy left, basically the only female looking one, because other than that it was Mr. Mime. So that's why I went with that one. Yeah, I think that's about it for this video. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed making this one because I think it basically brings into question what I think would fit into these roles. But yeah, this was rather entertaining and fun. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. But on that note, if you like this content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Go follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/LordOfWeebies. I'd love to see you there. And, yeah, that's about it. So I'll see y'all next time.